And wow, I can't believe I had never heard of this case. This is Susan Cox Powell. She was born on October 16th of 1981 in the state of Oregon. And this is Josh Powell. Josh was born on January 20th of 1976 in Oregon. And Susan and Josh were actually both Mormon, and it's all about commitment and, you know, marriage being a sacred thing. So a lot of them get married really young. They actually met at a church function when Susan was only 19 years old. In April of 2001, they officially tied the knot. With their whole life ahead of them, ready to start a family. Eventually they decided to leave Oregon and move to Utah. And on January 19th of 2005, Susan and Josh had their first son. His name was Charles, and 2 years later, on January 2nd of 2007, they had their other son, Braden. Their family was thought to be a perfect little close-knit family. However, we soon find out that this was not the case. One of Susan's friends, Susan started to tell her that their relationship wasn't so perfect. She claims that Susan told her that Josh was very abusive. She said that Josh owned her and she had to do whatever he wanted her to do. Apparently at one point, Josh also withdrew affection and love from her. They were also really struggling financially. In April of 2007, Josh declared bankruptcy. Another very strange thing is that Susan took this very odd video of herself filming her belongings. Considering what happened to her, it feels weird, but I guess it's kind of smart to do. She basically filmed their whole house so that they had record of what they owned in case there was a flood, a fire, or something like that.
This is me, July 29th, 2008, covering all my bases, making sure that if something happens to me or my family or all of us, that our assets are documented. Hope everything works out and we're all happy and live happily ever after as much as that's possible. Charlie, say hi.
But a lot of people speculate that maybe she was doing it in case something happened with Josh. And in this video, she kind of like dogs on Josh a few times. I mean, nothing like intense, but she's like, oh, he didn't help me with this, or he doesn't do this, or whatever. And she doesn't seem too thrilled with him.
Josh bought a lot of stuff and then he had to bankrupt it. And then he bought a little bit more on my credit. And I had necklaces too. I don't know where those are. Got in a rage, broke this and threw all my DVDs and made a mess because he was angry at me. This was about a year or two back. This is a can organizer that Josh and I made. I had to help him all through the way. He doesn't do projects by himself.
So moving forward in time here to December 6th, 2009. So that morning, Susan and the two boys, Braden and Charles, who were 4 and 2, went to church. And then later on that day, a neighbor came and visited them. However, the next morning, Monday, December 7th, Susan was supposed to drop her boys off at daycare and never showed up. The daycare luckily called Josh's sister. So Jennifer actually went over to their house to check on them. When she got there, she knocked on the door repeatedly and there was no answer. She called police and the police actually made the decision to break into the house. And when they got in there, all they found was Susan's purse and her phone. But she wasn't there. None of them were. And they also found 2 big box fans pointed at the carpet, like trying to dry it. Josh claimed that he and his sons had just returned from a spontaneous camping trip. They said that Susan was not with them, so they had no idea where she was. He didn't leave his house until midnight. Now, if you have been camping, I have been camping many times in my life living in Colorado. You do not leave at midnight. Like, that is, especially with 2 kids, but he claims that he took the kids to Simpson Springs in West Utah. Police actually visited the campsite later on December 10th, but found no evidence of any type of crime. Now, one of the weirdest things about this case is that it took Josh 2 days to alert Susan's family that she had gone missing. And they claim that when he did tell them, he didn't seem concerned about her, didn't seem like he was proactive about looking for her, and seemed to have no clue where she went. Like, she just basically up and vanished. But this quickly became a really big case in Utah, and it wasn't long until it was national news. At this point, police had no sort of leads about where Susan was, and Josh at this point was just a person of interest, not an official suspect. There just was no evidence for them to make the move on Josh, and it was a big mistake. Only a month after Susan went missing, Josh decided to randomly up and move. And this looked really shady to pretty much everyone. Like, you'd think if your wife was missing, you'd stay put so she could come back to you, or you could be around the area to help look. But no, Josh and his boys decided to move to Washington. So later on in summer of 2010, yes, all of this time has gone by. No one knows where Susan is. They can't do anything about Josh. The boys are at a summer camp. And while they were there, Braden drew a very disturbing picture. He drew a minivan and he drew himself in it, his brother in it, and his father, but not his mother. And when he was asked where his mother was, he said that she was in the trunk. He then continued to say that he remembers his mom and dad getting out of the car and then only his dad coming back. The older brother, Charlie, also said the same thing. One time he even told his teacher that his mommy was dead. And even after these events happened, the police still did not see a reason for arresting Josh. So people were starting to get really sketched out, the general public, just starting to think like, obviously this guy seems like he's involved in it. So Josh kind of felt the heat on him, and at this point he brought in his father, Steven, to help. So they decided to make it seem like Susan was mentally ill. But in an interview, Josh also says that Susan could have been cheating on him. They believe it could have been 30-year-old journalist named Steven Kocher. Steven disappeared just a few days after Susan. Steven actually disappeared from Las Vegas, about 400 miles from where Susan was. So this was just a ridiculous claim out of nowhere. And then his dad started to act like the creep of all creeps. He did an interview where he said that Susan was very towards him. Now this is not Josh, this is his father, Steven. And this creep even wrote a song about her and posted it to his website. It's called Secretly. It's so creepy. Susan's friends and family felt like these claims were complete BS. They said that Susan was actually very afraid of him. He creeped her out. He would stick his hand up the back of her shirt. And apparently the reason they even moved in the first place to Utah was to get away from Steven because he creeped her out so much. So investigators started to think that something was weird about Steven, and they decided to search his home. Police removed at least 3 computers and 4 boxes of material from the house. They found 4,500 pictures of Susan that was taken without her knowing, including close-ups of her body parts. On September 22nd, Steven was arrested for child and voyeurism, which is watching someone without their knowledge. He claimed that he was not guilty. And once investigators found out about this, both of the boys were taken from Josh and put in foster care. Susan's parents immediately tried to file for custody of the kids. They started to get really worried that maybe he would harm the kids, that they knew something or they witnessed something while they were on that camping trip, and that he would try to get rid of them. In September of 2011, the judge did grant custody to the grandparents, and the judge said that if he moved out of his dad's house, they could do supervised visits. Josh agreed, and he ended up moving to Graham, Washington. And at first, he was only allowed to see his kids in a secure facility. However, soon they made the decision to let Josh do in-home supervised visits. So someone's still in the house watching, but it's in your house, not at some facility. Now this ended up being a huge mistake. So this is Elizabeth Hall. She was a caseworker who was assigned to assist the home visitations between the boys and Josh. On February 1st of 2012, Josh actually had a court date scheduled as part of his attempt to get his sons back. However, when he was in court, the judge brought up a completely new discovery. Police discovered really disturbing cartoons that were very because these were just drawings and not actual pictures that he took, they couldn't arrest him. However, the judge actually ruled that the boys would remain with their grandparents until Josh received a psycho evaluation. And Josh did not take this news well. Investigators believe he started concocting an evil plan. Josh went and withdrew $7,000 out of his bank account. I think he then went and bought a ton of gas from the gas station. Then went to a thrift store and donated all of his son's toys. And then February 5th, 2012, that morning, the boys were actually telling their grandparents how they didn't want to go see their dad. Although caseworkers did say that when they were together, everything seemed great and they seemed really happy to be with him. His grandma reassured him that everything was going to be fine and that his dad had fun things for them to do and was excited to see him. Elizabeth picked up the boys and drove them 10 minutes from the grandparents' house to Josh's new house. And as they were on their way, Josh actually wrote an email to his family members. All it said was, "I'm sorry, goodbye." And then he left a very distraught message for his family.
It's without my sons, and I'm not able to go on anymore. I'm sorry to everyone I've hurt. Goodbye.
Josh's sister heard the voicemail and got insanely worried and called 911.
I think my brother might be in trouble or something. What's going on with your brother? I don't know. He's sending weird emails. He's saying goodbye and stuff. It says that Josh has been in the media, right?
She tried to call her brother several times, but there was no answer. Meanwhile, Elizabeth and the boys pulled up in the driveway, and as soon as they did, the boys jumped out of the car and ran up to the front door. And as she was walking up to the door, he gave her this really weird look, kind of shrugged at her, and slammed the door in her face before she could get inside. So the boys were in, and she was not. Elizabeth started screaming at Josh to open the door, banging on the door, and then she heard Josh say, "Charlie, I have a big surprise for you." And then she heard Braden start crying out. Josh was attacking his sons with a Then Elizabeth started to smell gasoline.
Hey, I'm on a supervised visitation for a court-ordered visit. The kids went into the house and the parent, the biological parent, whose name is Josh Powell, will not let me in the door. It's 8119, and I think it's 89. I don't know what the address is.
Okay, that's pretty important for me to know.
You can't find me by GPS?
No.
But I think I need help right away. He's on a very short lease with CSHS. Are you there?
Yes, ma'am, I'm just waiting to know where you are.
Okay, it's 8119 189th Street, Port East, 2 Alice, 98375. I smell gasoline and he won't let me in.
Whose house
Got
is
the
it?
kids in the house and he won't let me in. It's a supervised visit.
How did he gain access to the children before you got
He
there?
grabbed it. I was one step in back of them.
So they went into the house and then he locked you out?
Yeah. Okay, how long will it be?
I don't know, ma'am. They have to respond to emergency, life-threatening situations first.
Well, this could be life-threatening. He went to court on Wednesday and he didn't get his kids back. I'm afraid for their lives.
Okay, has he threatened the lives of the children previously?
I have no idea.
All right, we'll have the first available deputy contact you.
Oh my god, it me off how they acted. A lot of them are really great and are really good at their job, but some of them are just so disrespectful, and they did not understand the severity of this emergency at all. But by the time that anyone would get there, it'd be way too late. After several minutes, Elizabeth tried her best to convince them to come. As soon as she got off the phone with them though, she turned around and Josh's house completely exploded. No one survived the explosion other than Elizabeth, who was outside.
Hello?
Hi, ma'am. Were you calling about the fire in the 8200 block? Do you know the exact address of the house, or are you
Yes,
supposed
it's 8119 189th Street, Port East,
Okay.
2 hours.
Okay, stand line. Do you know if anyone's in the house?
Yes, there was a man and 2 children. I just dropped off the children and he wouldn't let me in the door.
Okay, stand line for the fire department. Okay, I'm going to get them on the line. Do not hang up. Hold on.
I mean, this was so terrible. The community was so shook. Friends and family of Susan are starting to think, oh yeah, 100% Josh must have done something to Susan. When Josh's father, Stephen, was notified about the incident, he didn't even seem to care. Susan's family thinks that Stephen probably knows something about this, but he's decided to plead the fifth when it comes to Susan's case. Josh's sister, Jennifer, the one who came up to the house, fully believes that Josh his wife and kids. She said she actually had a feeling that he did something to Susan from like day one. Stephen was actually released from prison on July 11th of 2017. He had served a total of 7 years, and he actually passed away on July 23rd of the following year, 2018. The official death for Josh and the 2 boys was carbon monoxide poisoning, and in August of 2012, the police actually released more interesting things about Josh. Apparently, prior to her disappearance, Josh withdrew his kids from daycare, canceled Susan's regular chiropractic appointment, got rid of her retirement account, and talked to a coworker about how to hide a body. And he specifically talked about getting rid of a body in an abandoned mine shaft in Utah. February 11th of 2012, there was a funeral held for the boys. The reason I didn't make this video into like a where is Susan Powell is because we're pretty sure Susan is not alive. Her family is actually trying to get her legally presumed dead. But on February 11th of 2013, Michael actually took his own life. Soon after that, they closed the investigation, but shortly after that, they found a handwritten will that's assumed to be Susan's, and it said, "If I die, it may not be an accident, even if it looks like one," and it instructed the reader to not show her husband. Susan's family ended up having to go through a court battle with Josh's family, who was trying to get her estate. They were trying to have her legally announced as dead, but finally in March 2015, her family got full control of her estate, as it should be. And in December of 2017, they asked the 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals to let a jury decide if Washington's Child Welfare Agency is liable for the deaths of their grandchildren, Charlie and Braden. One of their attorneys argued that the missing wife should have been a red flag and that they never should have allowed the kids into the house, which I completely agree with. It's hard because, you know, those agencies are trying their best, but oftentimes a lot of these kids end up in such shitty situations that could have been prevented because of mistakes like this. I know this story is so sad. I have like no happy ending. My heart goes out to anyone personally connected to the family in any way. I just cannot imagine going through this. What a terrible, terrible tragedy. But that's it for me today, guys. Stay safe, and I will see you next time. Bye. This app called Randonautica. You're supposed to imagine something that you want to see, and then this app tells you a location to go to, and then the thing to do has been to film yourself going to these coordinates for TikTok. What happened with this app in this case is just wild, and it could have solved a true crime case. So this happened back in Seattle, Washington on June 19th. There was a group of teenagers that were randonauting and filming it for TikTok. So the app ended up taking them to the 1100 block of Alki Ave along Elliott Bay. They came across this suitcase propped up on a bunch of rocks. Later on, we found out that there were 2 bodies in that suitcase. So first of all, obviously these remains were taken in for identification, and they were able to identify them. The remains belong to 2 people. One of them is named Austin Wenner, and he was 27 years old, and the other was a woman who's named Jessica Lewis, who's 35 years old. Now, these 2 had been in a relationship for 8 years. They had a really strong relationship. There are a few articles that said that he was a father. I'm not sure how in the child's life he was. I'm sure a lot of you will end up looking up Austin Wenner, and if you do, you will see that there was someone named Austin Wenner in that area who had a possession charge at some point, but we can't confirm that this was Austin Wenner from this crime. The King County Medical Examiner said that they had been shot a few days before the bodies were found. And what's really weird is Jessica was actually found with pieces of grass in her mouth, which we have no idea how she ended up with that. It's possible that when she was shot at, she was running away and maybe fell into the grass when she was shot. Also, it's been pointed out how it was kind of surprising how these remains were found. Like, they really weren't hidden very well. It didn't seem like the person who hid them really wanted them to stay hidden too long. So it's been brought up that maybe they wanted the suitcase to be found by somebody, that they wanted to make a statement, or the killer wanted the family members to know that their loved one had been killed. And recently, we have gotten a big update that the killer has been found. So obviously, when they were trying to solve this case, police first looked into the uploaders of this TikTok. Were they possibly involved in it? Did they know that these remains were there? And they quickly cleared them and said the kids had nothing to do with this. Then, of course, people were wondering about the creators of the app. Did they somehow know that the remains were there and led people to them? However, police looked into this further and actually talked to the developers of the app and determined that this was in no way connected. It was a complete coincidence, I guess you could say. Or some people would say that that's the app working and that's manifestation in action. But I don't know. Everyone has their own personal opinions about that. But very recently, on August 19th, we found out that it was actually their landlord that killed them. His name is Michael Lee Dudley. So all the information isn't completely out yet, and we don't for sure know the motive, but it's likely that it was a possible rent dispute. Apparently, they were living in a house that Michael owned, and they couldn't afford their rent, which was $1,500 a month, and they kept struggling to pay it. Also, Michael is claiming that they were stealing from him and that they had locked him out of the house in the past. Unfortunately for him, though, those are not good reasons to kill somebody or 2 people and then try to get away with it. He was not happy with Jessica and Austin as tenants, and he told them that they needed to leave, and they got in a big fight. But on that day that they were fighting, a neighbor actually overheard Austin say, "Please don't do this, just let me leave." And when they searched the house, they actually found blood and bullets in the couple's room that they had stayed in, which is kind of confusing since Jessica was found with the grass in her mouth. We still have no idea how that happened, and now we know that the crime took place inside. Now, like I said, we can't confirm 100% that this is the actual motive for killing them. There might be more to the story than we are hearing. And when it comes to Michael, he has a really shady past. It's not like he was a nice guy and then just did this out of nowhere. These 2 are fighting back here. Can you guys do this a different time? A woman named Marlise Gordon has come forward to say some things about Michael. She was in a relationship with him from 2012 to 2016. She said that Michael is extremely smart, he's very well connected in social circles, and that he has a very intense personality. No. She also said that he had been abusive to her in the past. Now, what's interesting is even though Michael's bail is set at $5 million, children, please. Apparently this guy knows a lot of people and has a bunch of connections, and Marlise is worried that he has enough connections that he might get some donations and could possibly round up $5 million and be bailed out. But as of right now, that's all we know. It sounds like they were killed over a rent dispute. And if that's the case, that's just crazy to me. To have that type of anger in you, where you would be willing to murder two innocent young people over something like that, no matter what they were doing, is so amazing to me. And it makes you wonder, has he snapped before? Has he killed anyone else in the past? But that's all for me today, guys. Stay safe. Many of you have heard about the Watts family, Chris Watts, Shanann Watts, and their children and what happened. But let's go ahead and get started. This is Shanann and Chris Watts, and they were married and lived in Frederick, Colorado. They had two beautiful daughters, 3-year-old Celeste and 4-year-old Bella. Shanann was also 15 weeks pregnant, and she actually posted a video over the summer showing her letting Chris know that she was pregnant. Now that looks like a really happy family, right? Well, something was going on beneath the surface. They found out that their son was actually going to be a boy, and reportedly she was going to name him Nico. Shanann was a sales rep for Lavelle, which is a health and wellness company that sells nutritional products. So she was very involved in that and seemed to be very social, had a lot of friends, had a lot of presence, and people really, really liked her. And Chris was in the oil and gas industry, and people thought of Shanann and Chris as a really strong and solid couple. No one ever suspected that they were having issues or that Chris would be the type to do anything malicious. But that would all change on Monday, August 13th of this year. So Shanann was out of town before this, so she was coming home that night. At 1:48 a.m., a neighbor's security camera picked up Shanann being dropped off from the airport and coming home. She was dropped off by a friend, and she was on a business trip to Arizona. And according to Chris, he woke up that morning around 4 or 5 a.m. to get ready for work, and at 5:27 a.m., a neighbor's security camera picked up Chris. He was backing his truck up to his garage, and he told law enforcement that he was backing it up so he could load some tools into his truck. 10 a.m. the next morning, Shanann had a doctor's appointment, and she didn't show up for it, so people started to get concerned. And a friend that had dropped her off said that she was concerned because she wasn't responding to any of her texts or calls that day. Chris claimed that at first he didn't think anything was wrong. He figured she was just at like a play date with the kids, like just doing normal mom stuff, and was busy. But then one of Shanann's friends actually went to her house and couldn't find her or the girls there. And this is when Chris realized that something was wrong. At about 1:40 p.m., the Frederick police officers were called. Chris gave officers the access to his house, and there wasn't any signs to point to Chris inside the house or someone else. But they were also really concerned because all of her personal items were still in the house. She didn't take anything with her. The next day, August 14th, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation and the FBI got involved with things. They issued a missing persons alert for all three of them and started searching. And on that day, it was a Tuesday, Chris did an interview, and wow. Obviously, he was acting desperate to bring them home, acting very concerned, but I don't know. I saw through the bullshit right away. Josh and I were watching it, and I had a bad feeling about Chris Watts. And turns out me and a bunch of other people who felt the same way were right. The next day, Wednesday, August 15th, police started investigating using a drone, and for some reason they were suspecting that the bodies may be near an oil field. And when they were looking at his house, they found bed sheets that were some type of pattern, and then they found this matching sheets to that out in their search. I'm not sure exactly where, but it matched the ones found at Chris's house in the trash can. And a few hours after this, they found out that Chris was actually having an affair with a coworker. And according to court documents, at this point, Chris said, "I will tell the truth after I talk to my father." And at 11:30 p.m. that night, Chris was arrested because the neighbors that he was staying with were a family friend, and they felt really bad for Chris at first. They used to play with the girls, they knew Shanann, they figured he couldn't do anything like this. And then they started to notice that he just wasn't forthcoming with information, so they called police. The next day, August 16th, Chris admitted to his wife and kids. Now, we didn't know this at first. It took a while for the media to come forward with the affidavit and explain this, but Chris has now changed his story, and it makes me infuriated. Chris has now claimed that he did not kill girls. He admits to killing Shanann, but he says that Shanann killed her daughters and that he killed her in a fit of rage after seeing his daughters. Chris claims that early that morning, he and Shanann had a fight. They had a emotional conversation about their relationship. No one knows exactly what was said, but that's what he claims. And then he claims he went back into their bedroom and they had one of those video baby monitors that records and you can like see video of your child. And he claims that he saw Shanann Celeste and Bella on the floor already. He said he was so angry and so mad at her for doing this that he ran in the room and he decided to strangle her too out of rage. And then remember how the neighbor's security camera picked him up backing his truck up to the back of the garage and loading something in it? Well, now we know it was the bodies. And the same day around 2:30 p.m., Chris appeared in Weld County Court. He was obviously denied bail, and while he was in jail, he confessed to where the girls were. And the police already pretty much knew at this point. He put the bodies on the same oil field that he worked on in Darko. They had a really beautiful vigil for Bella, Celeste, and Shanann and her unborn son, Nico. It's truly amazing to see how the community has come together. Colorado is such a strong state filled with really good people, and the people here are angry. We want justice for the Watts girls and Nico. There's a lot of other information out there about their finances. I'm not sure exactly. It's so hard to say exactly what number, or you know, this is someone's personal information that it's just hard to put the picture together without all the information. But it does seem that they were in quite a bit of debt. I know the defense side has asked for swabs of the girls' necks, and I'm guessing that's because they believe Shanann's DNA will be on their necks because they believe that she them. Chris is basically going to be hanging out in jail until November 19th. That will be his next scheduled court appearance. That is really all I have to say about it. Unfortunately, I wish I had a better note to end on, but we will see what happens, and hopefully we get justice for Shanann, Nico, Celeste, and Bella. While Cooper was outside in the car dying, Ross was busy sending nudes to a total of 9 different women. A+, buddy. When she was 20 years old, she met a man named Ross Harris. Once they were married, they wanted to have kids pretty much right away, but they really struggled to get pregnant, as so many people do. And then a miracle happened. Leanna said that Ross was extremely excited to be a dad. I mean, overjoyed, in fact, just loved being a father. It was a completely normal morning on June 18th of 2014. Ross was in charge of bringing Cooper to daycare every day on his way to work, and then Leanna would pick him up on her way home. So on that day, Leanna left work around 4 p.m. She headed straight to Cooper's daycare to pick him up, and there's all this camera footage of her. She looks completely normal going in there like any other day to get him. However, when she went in there, Cooper wasn't there and was never dropped off that morning. I mean, can you imagine how freaked out you would be as a mother? You would instantly go into panic, and she did, although her behavior, she was very, very calm for someone in this type of situation. Her first thought was that someone kidnapped Cooper from daycare, but then her second thought was, and she said this out loud, maybe Ross left him in the car. That's kind of a weird thing to say, very specific. So Leanna decided to go to Ross's office, and when she got there, finally her phone rang, and it was a detective, and he said to just stay where she was. He was gonna come to her, and when he got there, he said this.
There'll be no easy way to tell you this. Your child is deceased. Very sorry to have to tell you that.
So let's back up a little bit here. Ross did something really, really weird. On that day, he went straight through the intersection, going right past Cooper's daycare. He went into his office parking lot with Cooper still in the back, and 30 seconds later, he exited the vehicle, locking it and leaving Cooper outside in the parking lot in the hot sun. At 4:15 p.m., Ross left work, went into his car, got in like everything was normal, and drove out of the parking lot. He seems to still not have been aware that his son was in the back, because he continued to drive a full 1.5 miles before pulling over after he realized that Cooper was dead in the back. He got out of his car and started frantically asking people for help, and someone called the police after seeing him doing this. When the police got there, they described Ross as acting extremely unusual. They said that someone else was giving his son CPR and Ross was just walking around the parking lot on his cell phone. With Ross's behavior being so strange, he was immediately considered to be a suspect and placed in a police car. Ross started complaining that the car was too hot, that he wasn't getting enough air back there. Are you kidding me? Do you know what you just put your son through? Are you serious? So people were on Ross's side from the beginning. And the thing about this is, I'm sure most of you know, this is not uncommon at all. On average, 37 children die per year from being left inside of a hot car. This actually even has a name: forgotten baby syndrome. And a big part of this is obviously distraction, but also exhaustion. I mean, a lot of parents, new parents especially, are so tired. I mean, there's some babies that just don't sleep. They're up all night and you're going to work as a zombie. You've slept 2 hours, had a screaming infant in your face, and a lot of parents end up getting kind of brain fogged, and they honestly do forget, and it's terrible. It ruins their lives. I mean, can you imagine how you would feel? So obviously Ross was brought directly to the station for questioning. So then Leanna got to the police station and went into the room with Ross. People were really torn about Leanna's behavior in this room, and I don't know really what to fully think of it. First thing that she did when she saw Ross, knowing that he just, I mean, as she thought, accidentally killed her son. I mean, whether it was an accident or not, you'd be angry, right? You'd be like, well, how could you do this? And she instantly went into this super nurturing, caring mode for him, asking if he was okay, rubbing his leg. People are wondering, how did she stay that calm when her son just died in a hot car? He told Leanna that he was worried about seeing Ross being taken out of the car because he was scared about what he would look like. And this kind of struck officers funny because they figured that seemed like he knew that he was already dead either way. Investigators were starting to think that he may have actually set this up and killed his child. 15 days later, Ross and Leanna went to court. First of all, the position of the car seat to Ross's seat were extremely close, only 6 inches away. Ross says that Cooper must have fallen asleep in the car ride. They were just at Chick-fil-A, and he was wide awake in the video recording. Chick-fil-A was only half a mile from Ross's work. He would have had to fall asleep extremely quickly. And then probably the most damning evidence, in my opinion, Ross actually went back to his car around noon, opened the door of the car, I think to put light bulbs in it. And the weird thing about this is he never mentioned it to police. Detectives also looked at Leanna. They thought that maybe her behavior could have been a little off, or maybe she had something to do with it. They also thought her reaction to finding out that her son was dead was very, very odd.
There's gonna be no easy way to tell you this. Your child is deceased.
Where's my husband?
So they ended up determining that there was honestly nothing that they could definitively prove that Leanna had any knowledge of this or planned her child's murder, and trial continued for Ross. However, one of the biggest discoveries in this case happened a year after Ross was first arrested. After going through Ross's phone, they found out that he had been using this app. It's called Whisper. Some of you may have heard of it. It's an anonymous app where you can post things publicly or privately, but it's all anonymous. And he was using this messaging app on that morning with Cooper. He was actually talking to someone anonymously about how he wasn't happy in his marriage or being a father. And the last thing that he said to this person before locking his child in the car was, "I love my son and all, but we both need escapes." They also found out that Ross had been various people that morning. He had been virtually and physically cheating on Leanna, and he was doing this with dozens of women, men, and underage girls. And while Cooper was outside in the car dying, Ross was busy sending nudes to a total of 9 different women. A+, buddy. And after 26 days of trials, 70 witnesses, 1,200 pieces of evidence, Ross was found guilty of all 8 counts, including felony murder, and was sentenced to life in prison plus 32 years. If he's innocent and he didn't purposely do this and it was an accident, then that's so crazy. But if he really did do this and that's the way it looks, I think that's well deserved. That's it for me today, guys. I will talk to you next time. Bye.
walked over, she went screaming.
Wow. AJ claims that Adriana was killed by her own mother. So this is Adriana Hutto. She was 7 years old at the time. She had been diagnosed with ADHD and she was quite a wild child. So Amanda really struggled with her daughter Adriana. And then there was AJ, who was 6 at the time, and he was very different from Adriana. He was a very quiet, mellow kid, just a total sweetheart. Let's go to August 8th of 2007. They had this pool in their backyard, one of those above ground pools, and the kids were not allowed to go in this pool. AJ came into the house and said, "Mom, Adriana is in the pool." Adriana was terrified of water, so she figured she was playing around the pool. She didn't go out to check on her. That's the first red flag. And AJ went back out there, and when she didn't hear from them for a little while, she went outside and she saw that AJ was trying to save her, trying to get her out of the pool. And that's when she realized that Adriana was actually in the pool drowning. So the police came to the scene. They actually took this photo of Amanda next to the pool. They thought there was a chance that Adriana could still be alive, so they rushed her to the nearby Bay Medical Hospital. Amanda went with them, obviously. AJ went with his grandfather. This was actually his step-grandfather. His grandmother, I believe, was there too, and they took him back to their house, obviously, to get him out of the way. At the hospital, Dr. Renee Fox was the one who was working on Adriana, and she was trying to explain the condition of Adriana to Amanda outside of the room, and they still thought there was a chance for her at this time, so they were trying to tell her what her current status is, what they're going to do, that kind of stuff. And she asked, "Do you have any questions for me?" And Amanda said, "Where's the vending machine?" What? So that's another red flag. Shortly after, Adriana was pronounced dead. And when Dr. Fox told Amanda about this, she claims that Amanda had zero emotion. So this all happened very fast. She was pronounced dead, I mean, almost upon arrival. It was very quick. So obviously the police and all the forensic people at the time thought this was an accidental drowning. And then they got a call from AJ's grandparents saying that AJ needed to come in and talk to the police.
Adrian was laying this and Mom holding him walked over, she went screaming.
So wow. AJ claims that Adriana was killed by her own mother. So, you know, a lot of people can say, well, maybe he's lying. Well, why would a kid lie like this 4 hours after it happened? Enough to tell his grandparents for them to bring him to the police station. Obviously now the investigative team is like, oh my God, okay, we had this completely wrong. Amanda was charged in September. So before trial, they obviously do an investigation, and when they started looking into things and interviewing people that knew them, they were concerned that the kids were possibly abused, if not definitely neglected, because their house was a complete pigsty. When the investigators went in there, it was absolutely filthy. It smelled of urine, and one thing that they noticed was that there was no toys in the house. So they asked Amanda about this, and they said, you know, there's a 6 and 7-year-old here. Where are all the toys? This makes no sense. And she said, well, I took all of their toys from them as a punishment. They were gonna get them back within the week, and I stored them all in the shed. Now, I don't know if she thought they weren't gonna look in the shed, but they did, clearly. They went and looked in the shed, and there was no toys there. So that's a huge red flag. When investigators find no sign of children being able to play with something, that just screams neglect. And I mean, there's other witnesses who said that the kids weren't always fed, that they had all these behavioral problems, that she was known to lash out at them. What's crazy is that over time, AJ started to sort of tell a different story, or he told different versions of the story, or he'd contradict himself. At one point he said he didn't see her there. At one point he said he was in a tree in the backyard and was watching from afar. When he showed them that tree, it was impossible for him to have seen the pool from that tree. So things like that. But this is a 6-year-old witness. So this is hard because obviously he was the only witness, and children, do they lie? Yes. Do they lie on something like this? I don't know. I feel like a child wouldn't go to that extent and like make up something about their parent and keep it going for weeks and months. But he was the strongest bit of evidence. He was the thing that really held their case together when they went to trial. So he had to be the main witness. Before I go any further, I do want to tell you a bit of information, and that is that Amanda Lewis had another child before having either of these two, and it was a baby at the time, and she left the baby for a little while, like in a crib, and when she came back, the baby wasn't breathing. Looking back, investigators believe that she may have had something to do with that as well. So they actually offered her a plea bargain, which is where you plead guilty to something even if you say you didn't do it and you get a lesser sentence and you just avoid the trial altogether. So they offered her a 10-year sentence in exchange for the plea, the guilty plea. And she said, I didn't do it, so I want a fair trial, and moved forward with the trial. February 2008, so what, like 6-7 months later, the trial began. It is sad seeing AJ testify on the stand. When he testified, he really stuck to his story for the most part, but he was only 7 actually at the time of the trial. So he kind of got some things inconsistent. He would say things that didn't make a whole lot of sense. At one point he said that she was just getting bugs out of the pool. I think all of the questions really confused him. And I have to point out that when you're 6 years old and you witness whether she was murdered or just drowned on her own, it's still traumatic, and getting the information straight on a traumatic event is very hard. Oftentimes you block out things, and I think that's why he can't remember where he was standing or what he was doing. That's why I think that the most credible testimony for him was what he said when he first went into the police office. I mean, he had no idea that this was going to go to trial. He didn't understand it. There is one piece of evidence that I think really locks this in. The medical examiner said that there were bruises found on her head, and that is consistent with what AJ said, like the grabbing of her face. They were in the right places for that to be true, which makes him so much more credible. She still claims that she is, however, innocent. Her version of events is that Adriana was trying to get bugs out of the pool. She fell in, but what's kind of weird about that is Adriana was 7 at the time, and the pool was 4 feet deep. She could have just stood up. So it doesn't make a lot of sense. So she was found guilty. A jury found her guilty in 2 hours, including their lunch break. So they were pretty sure about it. And the judge was definitely tough on her. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. So she will be in there until the day that she dies. Now, this is pretty crazy considering she was offered a 10-year sentence. If she just went that road, she would only be in there 10 years, but now she's going to be in there the rest of her life. And it's just such an interesting case to ponder, because if you think about it, AJ is largely the reason that his mother went to jail. If you were wondering about AJ, he has been adopted and has a great family. He's doing well in school, but it's going to be hard for him, especially as he gets older, realizing how big of a part he played in his mother's sentence. But that's it for me today, guys, and I'll talk to you guys next time.